Earlier this week, I reviewed this headphone, the Sony XM6, and in that review, I was excited because I can finally make this headphone actually sound pretty good. You see, I've previously bought the Sony XM3 and the XM5, and I was really disappointed in the sound quality out of those. But this one, okay, I'm actually also don't really like the way that it sounds out of the box, but you can fix it using the in-app EQ. And in this episode of Waveguide, I'm going to show you how I fix the sound on my XM6 using the EQ. And in fact, we're going to do it a couple of ways. I'm going to show you how to use the in-app EQ to fix the sound on the XM6, at least fix it according to my tastes. But I'm also going to show you how to use parametric EQ to take that EQ to the next level and make it sound even better. And if you like the idea of helpful content like this, well, shout out to our sponsor, Hi-Fi Go. I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to make the XM6 sound better than it does out of the box. But in my opinion, its ceiling is still kind of low relative to a lot of the stuff that I typically review. But if you want to check out like the latest IEMs and headphones that are a little bit more audiophile centric, Hi-Fi Go has got you covered. So I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's talk about, first of all, the problems with this headphone. And again, this is all from my perspective. I know everyone has kind of different preferences when it comes to sound quality, but for my preferences, this thing is just way, way too much bass. And I know from a lot of people's perspective, like there's kind of no such thing as too much bass, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I think I can change your mind, and hopefully this EQ will do that. Not because it's necessarily gonna have not a lot of bass. We're gonna try and keep as much bass as possible in this headphone and still give it the better characteristics. But here's my issue with having as much bass as you have in the XM6, especially the way that the bass is curved in the frequency response. And I guess we can go to that right here. This is basically just gobs of mud bass, all right? Having this much bass, it has detriments to the rest of the sound. It ends up kind of just clouding the mid-range. I think that also the bass qualities that a lot of people want out of bass, you don't really get. Like, you don't get that snappy bass attack with the satisfying sub-bass rumble. Can't really follow sub-bass guitar or just bass guitar notes because it's all just kind of clouded up by this mess of way, way too much bass. So that's kind of what we're going to try and fix. We're going to fix the bass levels, but we're also going to try and even out the mid-range a little bit to bring out vocal character and just overall give you a stronger sense of separation between instruments. Because that's the thing that I find is really lacking in the Sony XM line out of the box. But again, finally here with the XM6, we can fix it. So how do we do that? Well, of course, we use the in-app EQ. So if you're not familiar with this yet, hopefully you can get used to it or get familiar with it. But basically when you launch the app, you're going to see an interface like this. You scroll all the way down here to the bottom and you see this button that says device settings. Click into that, and while we're here on the sound tab, scroll down to the equalizer section, and here's where you can expand this. So by default, you're going to be in this off mode, right? This is the default sound signature of the headphone, which is what I was showing you earlier here in this frequency response. So this is the default sound signature. What we're going to try and get to, let me find my mouse cursor, is this. This is an improved version of the frequency response, again, for my taste, but as you can see, we're still giving it plenty of bass. It's still got gobs of bass, but we're evening out the mid-range and giving it more room to breathe and more room for, again, that definition. And how do we do that? Well, we do it by setting our sliders exactly so. Look, I guess before I get into the exact settings, I'm not trying to like dink around with you, but I do really encourage you to play with these tools for yourself and find really what works for you. And a couple of tips before you get into that. So one, as you're playing around with the EQ, right, as soon as you switch from the off mode into any of the custom modes, by default, the volume is going to drop, okay? So if you're trying to compare your EQ versus the default sound signature, and the volume is lower on your EQ, it's gonna almost always sound better when it's louder. So the default setting might sound louder. So what I recommend is actually, because there are 3 different custom options, you can use the manual slot, you can use custom 1, and you can use custom 2. I recommend leaving one of these completely flat like this, and then compare your EQ to that flat version, okay? And then try to keep the volume level the same. Basically what I'm saying is that, right, when you go to custom 1, let's say, for example, I don't know why I can't slide that, and you adjust up one slider, maybe you pull down the bass a little bit, rather than comparing it to the default sound signature in the off EQ mode where the volume is just going to be louder, compare it to the manual mode with no settings, which is going to be the same sound signature as off, but the volume is going to be readjusted down for you. So that's just kind of a little pro tip. And then another thing that I can show you real quick, this is actually kind of a cool trick. Let me go to SquigLink. So I've got this frequency response up on SquigLink. I'll have it linked in the description down below if you want to check it out for yourself. And using SquigLink tools to do your own EQ is actually really, really powerful because it's got this parametric EQ all built into it. Now, the downside is that the in-app here that we're using is a 10-band graphic equalizer. It is not a parametric EQ. So how do you use these SquigLink tools in order to do that? Well, you can kind of make these tools behave like a graphic EQ by just kind of plugging in some values, right? So if you go into the EQ, these are your different frequency ranges that you have access to, right? It's 31, 63, 125, 250 hertz, etc. So what you can do is you can go into SquigLink and we can input those values. Let me do this briefly. I won't do them all, but just to give you an idea. And so put in all 10 values, and then over here in the Q factor area, give it a Q factor of 1.41 for each of these, okay? And shout out to Listener, AKA Griffin, over at the Headphone Show for helping me out with this. But basically, once you do that, now as you, let's say you want to drop 125 hertz by 2 decibels, or by 2 notches in the app, well, you can do it here, and you'll see kind of a visualization of what that EQ is going to give you, right? It's going to show you that this red line here is the visualization of the change that you've made. If you want to drop it by more, you can drop it by -6, and you can see, again, the impact that that's going to have on the frequency response, which I think is super, super helpful. That was a tool that I used when I was coming to the EQ that I'm about to share with you. One note, though, on that is that I did find that it didn't match one-to-one when I measured the frequency response of the headphone after I gave it my EQ. It did seem that once you add in like a lot of negative bass in there, it tends to drop the bass even a little bit more than what the visualization will give you. So just take that into consideration. If you drop the bass by, let's say, 4 or 5 dB, and it sounds like less bass than you think it should be, it might actually be. So again, play it by ear, but again, that is a nice, useful tool. And okay, I promised I was not trying to dink you around. Let's take a look at my custom EQ for this headphone. And I think this is where I'll show it to you. So these are the settings that I've got. And I know that this is not the most readable format of it, so let me go over here actually, where I've kind of prepared a little visualization for it. And basically at, at the 31 hertz setting, give it +1. At 63 hertz, give it -3. All right, that's where we're cutting the bass. And then here at 125 and 250, I'm actually leaving them blank at 0. So what you might notice is that I'm not actually cutting the bass a whole lot in this. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm boosting the top end. And the reason that I'm doing it this way, normally when I EQ, I just EQ with cutting. But like I was mentioning, when you EQ with this headphone, it drops the standard volume. What I did with these EQ values is I basically made it so that when you have this EQ applied, the overall volume level is equivalent to having the EQ off entirely, like having it in off mode. So it just makes it easier for you to compare. Like I was kind of describing, there's a little workaround for that comparison and making it more reliable. But I'm not going to bank on you doing it. So I just made sure that this was matched to a similar volume level as the default. So yeah, these are the settings. If you want to match it for yourself, I guess pause the video right now and input these sliders. Again, this is what it looks like inside of the app. And then once you've done that, well, your headphone now has this frequency response, which again was the frequency response that I measured on my rig using these EQ settings. It wasn't just the calculated result. This is the actual result. And frankly, I think this sounds a lot better. The bass is just a lot cleaner. I think if you go and maybe I'll have some test tracks linked in the description so you can kind of go and hear what I'm hearing. Because your music content might actually change how this frequency response sounds for you, but based on the music that I listen to, this is just going to give you like a tighter bass attack. There's a track I'm going to link to by Men I Trust called Oh Dove, and it's got this really satisfying kick drum just throughout the song that on the default sound signature just sounds kind of bloomy and soft, and like it's there and it's a lot, but it doesn't have like the impact and snap on it that you're going to get when you use That's not it. When you use this EQ. So that's my recommendation. Check that out. Check out the songs down below. I'll put some notes on what to listen for in each of those if you're curious. But yeah, that is the basic gist of what my EQ is for the Sony XM6. But like I promised, we're not going to leave it there, because as good as this sounds with these EQ settings, it can actually get better. But to get better, we're going to need to use EQ outside of what this app can provide. I've already used the term parametric EQ a couple of times in this video. If you're not familiar with what parametric EQ is, I've actually done an entire video series on how to use parametric EQ. It is, frankly, it can be really easy and like fun to play around with, but it can also be really deep and really complicated depending on how much you want to get out of parametric EQ. I'm just going to show you what my settings are, and if you know how to load a parametric EQ profile, well, you don't have to think about it too hard. Just load the profile, and I'll have the profiles in the description so you can just like copy paste them or, you know, put them into a text file, but I'll also show them on screen if you want to copy them that way. This is where parametric EQ gets a little bit clunky, but again, I think we can make this headphone sound even better, because here's what I'm going to say. Again, as much as this sounds so much better to me than stock, it's not entirely perfect, and kind of the main issue, the main challenge and limitation that I have with the stock EQ app is kind of in this range of the treble. And also you might notice that the upper mid-range, it's like, it's hard to affect this peak without over recessing these, and there's like kind of a little bit of a harshness in the treble around this range that if you pull this down, then it starts to make the whole sound signature sound a little bit soft and blunted. And so this is like kind of the weakest part of the sound. But what I found was even just adding in like 1.5 decibels, maybe 2 decibels at around 5 to 7 kilohertz really brings out a lot of definition in the sound. And that's basically exactly what I did with the parametric EQ. So I'm gonna go over here, and just to start, these EQ settings are designed to be applied to the stock sound signature of the headphone, okay? So if you're using this EQ, don't use this parametric EQ that I'm about to apply, right? If you're using the in-app EQ that we just talked about, don't use these parametric EQ settings. Instead, turn it back into the off setting, right? Go into your EQ and go back to off like this, and then we can apply these parametric EQ settings, because then it's going to take this frequency response and it's going to bring us to this, which, I mean, you'll notice it looks very similar to what we did before, but a couple of differences, right? So I'm giving it just a little bit of extra spice up here, which again adds that sense of definition and gives it better sense of separation. And it just sounds more incisive and a little bit more hi-fi, so to speak. You also might notice that the bass down here, I didn't drop down quite as much. I think partly because it has a little bit of extra spice in it, and also just because I can get, using parametric EQ filters, we can make this bass even more better shaped. And again, knowing that the Sony XM fans want bass, I gave this thing extra bass with these parametric EQ settings. And if you want to know what those settings are, it's these, all right? Basically, it requires just 4 filters. All right, these are 4 peaking filters, if you're familiar with what parametric EQ peaking filters are. These are the frequencies you want them at. These are the gain levels that you want to set, the decibel gain levels. And then these are the Q factors that you want to set. And again, I'm going to have these values in the description if you want to check them out there and just copy paste them into a text file. Maybe I'll also put them into a text file that you can download so that it's easier. You don't have to even think about copy pasting stuff. Just download it and import it into a parametric EQ app of your choice. And I guess on that note, if you've never used parametric EQ before, if you're on Mac OS, the program I recommend is called Sound Source. If you're on Windows, the program I recommend is called Equalizer APO. And on Android, I recommend using Preamp EQ. If you're on iOS, you're kind of SOL. Like, there's no app that's going to work for the Sony XM6 to EQ it, so I don't have a recommendation there. But again, all this stuff I will have linked in the description, along with my video where I talked more about this stuff. But yeah, these are the values. The other thing that you want to make sure is that you're inputting a negative pre-gain of a little bit over minus 3 dB, just to make sure that none of this results in clipping, because you don't want that. That will make just everything sound much worse rather than sounding better. Now, that is how I think you can make this headphone sound, frankly, a lot better than what it sounds like coming out of the box. But there's still some limitations here because this EQ relies on, it assumes that your headphone still has power. This is the funny thing about the headphone, is that you can actually plug this thing into your computer, your phone, whatever, using an analog connection with the headphone completely powered off. And when you do that, the sound changes completely, and it changes completely for the worse. Let me go over here. This is the frequency response of the XM6 when you've got it plugged in with an analog cable and the headphone is completely turned off, okay? You've got no power, you've got no battery life to it. This is the stock frequency response, which is just flat garbage. Like, nobody should be listening to this. I don't think they intend for people to listen to this, but it is a feature and you can listen to this, but it is quite unfortunate to hear. I'll just say that. That said, like, there might be scenarios where your battery's dead and you still want to listen to music, or let's say like the battery in your headphone eventually just dies. Like, that is a fact of life with Bluetooth headphones, is the battery might someday die, but you can still plug it into an analog source and you can still listen to it, but it's going to sound like this. But again, using parametric EQ, we can fix it. And this is where I got the frequency response with a handful of parametric EQ filters. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, this required quite a few more, right? In the previous example, we used just 4 filters. Here, it took me like 9 filters to get the frequency response of the headphone pretty good. So we're not going to go over them all by hand, but again, if you want to pause the video and copy them here, you can. I'll have them linked in the description down below, which will probably be a lot easier. But basically, these are the filters that you want to apply. And the only meaning of the gray box out here is just to make it easier to count. This is one block of 3, this is another block of 3, and that's the next block of 3. But you input these parametric EQ values. Again, give it a negative pre-gain of about 10.5 decibels, because we are adding a lot of boost to the frequency response. But you can take this very awful sounding headphone and actually make it sound really, really good. And if you really want to see the power of parametric EQ, like, this is just a good example of how you can take a sound that nobody would want to listen to. I mean, okay, maybe there's somebody, but like, this isn't just my audiophile snobbery saying that nobody wants to listen to this. Like, I don't think anybody likes this sound signature, but using parametric EQ, you're going to find out you can actually make this headphone sound really good. So there you have it, 3 different ways to EQ the Sony WH-1000 XM6 and make it actually sound pretty stinking good. Again, I'm going to have those EQ profiles linked in the description down below. You can copy paste them, download them, however is easiest for you to apply. And I'm also going to link to those test tracks that I was talking about. Look, we all have different preferences in terms of sound quality, and a lot of those preferences come from the music that we're listening to. So if you want to know exactly what I'm talking about, those test tracks will be a good place to start. And again, a shout out to our sponsor, Hi-Fi Go, for making waveguide videos like this possible. I've got them linked in the description down below. Check them out. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get